All right, everyone. So we're going to start with introductions. I don't know if you know who Steve Kromer is, but my guess is everyone here does. My name is John Avina. I'm the president of Abraxas Energy Consulting. By the way, Abraxas was recently sold to Hillman Consulting, which is a company that primarily does asbestos and construct a kind of owner's representative for construction management or something like that. And they also do mold remediation and testing. Okay, that aside. Steve is someone I've known for 30-something years. He's a total, not a total, he is one of the premier leaders in M&V in the United States and probably the whole world. When Steve talks, a lot of people listen. They don't always agree with him, but they all certainly listen to what he has to say. And he's always bringing in ideas from all over the place. And Steve, why don't you introduce yourself for those folks who don't know who you are? I'm sure there's very few of them, but go ahead and do that. And then let's get, oh, one thing before we do that, Steve's only going to talk for maybe 15 minutes. And then what he wants to do is have us, have you guys ask questions and we'll go through your questions. So this is going to be a little bit of a forum. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, thanks, John, and congratulations on the transition from your Abraxas to Hillman, and may that go well. And yeah, I know it was a long road for you. It's great. And you're also been a leader and a stable participant in what we call M&V for the last 20-something years, 25 years. So thanks for all that, all you've done to support that and build this community here. Yeah, what I want to talk about today is this thing called the M&V Professional. So my background is as a mechanical engineer from Virginia Tech. I went out in the world for a number of years. I just floated around, driving around my car, putting current transformers into electrical panels from Montana to Washington to Pennsylvania to DC. And I was metering buildings for various studies. And these studies were funded by utilities and governments who wanted to know where were the electrons going in buildings. And you can ask yourself, well, that's, how useful is that? Well, if you want to know where you can save energy or where you can do energy management, it's good to know how current structures out there in large amounts are using energy. So you study them that way. And that's what we did in something called end use load studies in the early 1980s. And that gave me a real familiarity with the guts of buildings, actually, and how they're wired and all that. I was fortunate to capture a job temporary and then full-time at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, where they used some of those, I got to use some of those skills and being able to just go meter and collect evidence from actual real buildings and know that they're all kind of broken, by the way, and figure out how to influence our facility at the lab. It was called in-house energy management at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I was basically a blue collar, just engineer, in the facilities department, but we were doing cool things with the buildings, trying to fix them. So we had to do technology like T8 lamps, it was great. We went from magnetic ballast to electronic. We went from no control systems to control systems. And all these were funded by the Department of Energy. So the resources came from the government. And we invested them, and we were good. Energy management was a thing. It got paid up front. We started then a pilot program for a different sort of financial deal where it was called performance contracting, and the federal government wanted to get into that. This is in the late 1980s, not 1880s, 1980s, early 1990s, and then EPACT comes along, and government policies change, and next thing you know, the federal government can procure something called savings. They don't buy the chiller or the light bulb, they buy a stream of resulting revenue from the installation of energy management. So energy management takes this turn. Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories on the front. We do a pilot project, and on the basis of that, I get asked to go back to Washington for a year in 1994 and lead an effort to bring together all of our national resources in the US and come up with a protocol or a set of rules for how to do this funny thing called measuring nothingness, to measure the absence of energy that results from energy management. And that's sort of changed my whole career. And for 30 years now, yeah, 94, it's 84, 30 years, I've been more or less involved in that. So what I've got as a window on the last 30 years, and by the way, the whole term, even M&V, measurement and verification, as a body of knowledge or as a practice, really only came into its own right around the time we started writing those protocols. There was no previous M&V protocol until FEMP and IPMVP in the mid 1990s, 94, 95, 96 when they came out. So what's happened? 30 years, we see the energy transition evolving. So we see the need for the role of a professional to evolve. And what we've got now is in 2024, a pattern we're watching out there with the world changing and the need for our skill set, those of us who are involved in the quantification of energy management, the quantification of the absence of energy as a result of doing things. We need to keep changing learning skills, and almost most importantly, the role of a professional now is educating others and keeping them up to speed on what's happening. So the job description of energy professional here, it's changed over the last 30 years. It's going to change in the future. It involves a lot more judgment versus just the technical skills. They're both important, but you really need to know how to apply those skills and talk to people. So what do you need to do to remain relevant in this changing energy landscape? And what resources are available? So I'll put my first pitch. I did write a book last year. It's going to be out in July officially through AEE, Association of Energy Engineers, and River Publishers. And it's called The Role of an Energy Professional. So we'll talk about a little bit of that later too as well.
Can you pre-order that? Can you pre-order that book?
Yeah, it's available for pre-order now. I can put a link in the chat later if you want. Yeah, we'll figure that out. Yeah, and the price keeps changing. So if you want pre-order, watch out because it just dropped this morning, which is great. They're pricing it pretty high, but it's going to be a great book. So all right, so 2004, to 2000. So I went to for this seminar. I just looked at some old presentations I'd given, and one of them was from Berlin in 2004. I was at that point the chair of the Efficiency Valuation Organization, and what I was coming to the awareness in 2004 is that energy management's great. All you people out there, all 86 of you, I'm sure, are doing great things with installing new technologies, putting controls on, making our existing infrastructure operate better, and perform better, and in some cases generate this thing called savings. So you're generating some value, and you all want to get paid for that value. You all want to be rewarded for what the good things you do. And the thing is, the good things that we do as engineers, assuming most of us here are engineers, don't always get valued. And if they do, we don't have a lot of control over it. And that's because whether it's the tariff that's the using to value how much energy you saved and how you quantify that, or whether it's the carbon, or as we've seen, other things that have come and gone, the fashion of the day in terms of what the rewards are for externalities from our work. But when we do our work, a lot of things can happen besides just installing the chiller or the light bulb out there in the real world, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, so to say. Or now we have all this new stuff called ESG and building standards. So the role from 2004 to 2024 has changed, and we're going to look forward a little bit to where it's changing in the future. Calculating the value is increasingly complicated. We have things like negative pricing now in the middle of the day when there's so much solar on the grid. So interacting with our buildings with the grid, and we have to know when is it valuable to do our energy management. So all these things are part of what an M&V professional has evolved into, and what's needed if you want to get to the fine end point, the real goal, the end in mind. Is it Levy? Who's the guy, John, that does the 7 most important habits? Covey. All right. Think with the end in mind. What's the end in mind if you're a professional involved in M&V? It's that at the end of the day, when you submit that report and sit at the table, have your Zoom meeting, whatever it is, you provide a number to the guy, all the people at the table, and a check is written, or a Venmo is paid, or some account is cleared, and the money transaction happens. Or you go to your utility and the incentive is paid, and after the evaluation is done, the program is deemed good. Successful settlement is our goal. We run a process called M&V. It's not a static act, it's a process. And so really along the way, our goal is dispute avoidance. Okay, by the way, you asked me this to generalize on where I came into this too, John, and I don't think I told people I teach this stuff now. I teach for AEE, the CMVP program, and we were able to redo that program 2 years ago, again, based on fundamentally, now we're focusing on the role of a professional, emphasizing that, not so much all the technical skills, that has to come later. But I get to teach people, and I hear a lot, and that's one of the reasons I'm happy to do this talk today is I learn a lot from teaching about what people are seeing in the world in terms of building standards, net zero targets, other kinds of targeting things as what M&V is evolving into. So what we're trying to figure out is how to get M&V professionals to teach our market what's possible and then learn from them what they need so we can have successful settlement and avoid disputes. So dispute avoidance is another term for what M&V is really trying to do. Okay, this slide is from 2004, and who cares? But it's like this has been around for 20 years. That the energy industry, energy management broadly, it's always a choice between supply and demand. Can we go out and frack a few more wells up in North Dakota or out in western Texas, or are we going to go frack a few more buildings and find savings in our infrastructure? And so it's always like, where do we put our next million, billion, trillion dollars out there? And so supply and demand is one divide we work with. We have energy impacts that are obvious and immediate, like our bills go down, but we also have carbon and other things that happen. This is all from 20 years ago. Energy technology is a changing energy infrastructure. Guess what? It's still changing, right? Now we have PVs, EVs, storage, DR, DERs, DERMS, grid interactive stuff. Energy technology and the whole landscape's changing. And that means the policy environment's changing as well. It's not just simple performance contracts. Now you can go to ESG and get credit for your corporate participation in these things if you can score somehow. So how are you going to get scored if you're the CEO? You need to know that. So again, this is from 20 years ago, but the terms in the energy efficiency equation in terms of how you get value, they're not usually driven by us. In the past, it was this thing called acid rain. Who's heard of that lately? Probably some of you have never heard about that issue. But the solution was a cap and trade on the pollutant, and that solution, was actually worked well enough that you don't hear about acid rain much anymore. So the economic goods were assessed by regulation and rules by government, and not by the engineers. And that's still the case. ESCO contracts notwithstanding, where they might state what the value is, a lot of the value is value equation is defined by others, and we have to play along with them. Okay, that's kind of the big quick picture. But where are we now? What we see now in M&V as a professional is there's really simple, clear distinction about how to assess the impact of our great work. Now 89 of you out there. And one is simple, and this is in the protocols called option A in FEMP and IPMVP. You verify that whatever the concept you had worked. It's really simple and straightforward. And it could also be simple in terms of an EUI in a building. Let's say you have a portfolio manager and you want to know what the annual EUI is. Well, that's kind of a performance metric. It's a number of kilowatt hours in per square foot. It's something you can go measure, verify, quick. It's a target. You're done. The other thing we've used all along is this thing called the counterfactual method. And back when we wrote the protocols, we assembled all the bright people. Some of us, myself included, might have thought improperly that we'd somehow generated some new way of thinking about the world in which we could quantify the absence of something with these fancy tools called regression models. And it turns out everyone else in the world already knew about that. We weren't talking so much to them. Now we have the internet, and I have multiple resources that I talk to all the time or listen to that are coming at our problem, quantifying the impact of an intervention with different sets of tools and different concepts that are all potentially useful. So again, two things you can do in M&V in terms of quantifying energy management are do a simple performance check or build a model of a baseline, quantify it and update that model over time, which is what John's software has done for, and still does in option C, right? But challenge with that, as we all know, an M&V professional, as you get out there, well, now we got to update that model. We have to update it routinely for maybe weather impacts or occupancy or whatever it is. We have to build that model and then we have to update it. And then we have those crazy things called non-routine adjustments, which, out there in the rest of the world, they all have the same thing, confounding factors, or the terminology is just a little different, but it's the same idea. So right now, if you're an M&V professional, you're probably doing one of these two. Well, you're certainly doing one of these two things. And in this sense, it's really simple to communicate to others that there's a vast difference in the difficulty in applying these two things. Okay, again, the core issue with our whole energy management industry is it's absolutely not a problem to go say, I think a better chiller will perform better here. And you go purchase the chiller and you pay money for it and you install it and you pay for the labor. You turn it on and it works. That's all verifiable, straightforward, in front of our eyes, no problem. Now you run that thing for a year. How much did I quote unquote save? There is absolutely no perfect way to answer that question. It requires judgment. It requires judgment both on the terms of the analysis, but also the extent. How much money am I going to spend? And furthermore, and foremost, it requires defining what's meant by savings in that context. Are you going to take into consideration changes in weather, changes in occupancy? Who gets credit for them? Who doesn't? So all those things that you come into that stupid, silly, terrible word called savings would be fine if we define savings as something that's defined, not measured. Savings are never measured. They're always defined. That's a core premise. So we have this thing called the what would have happened meter. The red line here, it's everyone's familiar with. That's the joking term we use for what is also known as the counterfactual method. No big surprise there. It's not strange. Go look it up. Many other industries use this thing. We build a model, we update the model to have a hypothetical what would have happened, and we compare the hypothetical to what does happen. So again, our funny terminology we use is what would have happened meters and what did happen meters. Compare those two, you can come up with a stream or a flow or a massing of something called savings. All right, that's been a lot of M&V for the last 20 years. Suddenly we're out here, and I'm just going to see if this works. With all the changes going on in the infrastructure, we're seeing a lot more emphasis put back on targets. So we don't go out and invest money and try and amass how much we've saved over time. We're having targets, and we're trying to see, can we meet a target? So here's just one I'll just put up if you can see it. I haven't read this in detail, but I pulled this off yesterday. Science-based climate strategy solutions. Okay, what does that mean for the M&B industry? I don't know yet, but if you look at the lower right there, it's got graphs and charts and arrows going places. It's like, how are they implementing targets? I need to go to talk to these folks and see how they're doing this. Okay, I don't know. There's another one, science-based targets. Again, a nice curvy line there. It looks good, like things were getting hot. Now they're cooling off. And I like all the graphics, but what's behind this in terms of the M&V? I really don't know. So I've got to figure out like what these policies, who these people are that are pushing the next world in terms of M&V folks. A good buddy of mine, McGee Young, spun off from Recurve. I'm a full disclosure, an advisor to Recurve. They're great. But he formed something called Watt Carbon, and Watt Carbon is based on the idea that you can go into build these things called EACs, credits, and you do that through this stuff called M&V. So Watt Carbon tracking, the next generation of energy decarbonization management, EAC registration, all this great stuff to get value for your work, principles of measurement and verification. Okay, great. This is more, they use modeling. They use basically the counterfactual method. So I need to go learn more about that if I want to work in that industry, in that context. All right, and this, summing it up with a summit. I have on my schedule to train the CMVP in next month, but I might just jump on a plane and go out to this summit here on May 2nd and 3rd, the Open Sustainability Policy Summit, because it's going to be really important to communicate with these folks what's possible and how they're viewing M&V generally, since we're the backbone of the whole energy side of M&V. With terms of targets versus savings. How are you doing modeling? How are you thinking about all it? How are you building it into your policies? And then another one here, and I just again pulled this off the grid, off the web yesterday. Business as a force for good, sustainability summits popping up all over. ESG, how do you get credit for good work you're doing to clean up your building and get carbon credits and the rest of it? So I don't have time, there's not enough time on my schedule to attend all these, but this is where the next generation of policies are coming in terms of how you get credit for energy management. All right, with that, that's kind of a rapid run through, again, the history, where we are, and it looks like where we're going. And again, you can, let's see if this link actually works here. Available, yeah, pre-ordering June 28th is what the date is now. And we'll figure out how to put a link in this presentation for that. So to you all now, 90 of you, my call is, join the fight. Let's work together, because as the world, it's not your fathers or grandfathers M&B anymore. Changing environment is happening around us, and there's lots of other people out there that aren't in the current energy management world that can help us in terms of running our models, doing even Bayesian analysis, or all kinds of other things that are useful for running these models. We need to actually access them. so that we can teach and inform all the policymakers, because it's a wild world out there, and we need to be all together in terms of harmonizing our message, working together to make sure our work is actually valued properly, and we get a say in how it's valued, and it's done as rationally and as consistently as possible. So I don't know where we're going to be in 20 more years, 2044. I don't know if I'll still be working, but it's so exciting. I think I might be. It's like, who wants to quit when the world is evolving in a way that's sort of fascinating to watch. That's John. That's my those are my slides. So I think I stopped the show now.
Yeah. While you're busy figuring out how to stop at the show, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I want to tell you an anecdote first, which is kind of really embarrassing. But I like to tell embarrassing things about myself. I was asked to speak at NASCO maybe 15 years ago about changes to M&V. I don't know. I guess they asked me because they thought, he's an M&V expert. He's been, involved with Option C. All the ESCOs know who he is. He's been teaching ESCOs for years and all that. And so it's like, yeah, I guess I knew a bit. And I talked to a lot of ESCO people. But at the time, this was like, maybe the mid 2000s. There wasn't much going on as far as I could tell. Everything, it was like there was a lull in M&V. It's like M&V was not moving. It was one static science. And then all of a sudden, I don't know when it was, but all of a sudden I think it's when the utility people really started getting interested in this stuff, and it just like took off, and M&V just changed. Everything was, is that what you see?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so that's certainly one of the points in this presentation is that it's evolving, and the application of these methods is evolving. And if you talk about that timeline, I got over here 2004 and 5 is when I got involved in the California PUC work. And yeah, I mean, there's a huge similarity. That's when my eyes were opening the first time. I thought, again, we might have come up with something new in M&V in terms of the IPMVP and FEMP. It turned out the evaluation world already had all that, but different construct in terms of how you divide it up. It's uncertainty, who the audience really was. In that case, it's the ratepayers, and putting incentives in the right pockets and keeping them out of the wrong pockets, and making sure different people got rewarded for different types of things, not performance contracting. So that was how it was then, and now it's just another supercharged thing, because we don't know how to do M&V the way we used to do it because if there's not a stable baseline. If you characterize M&V as having a stable baseline of an operating system that you can characterize and follow into the future, you need a stable baseline. And if you've got EVs, PVs, demand response happening, there's no period of time that actually represents the future, and that's really problematic for running that method. It's not like it's over all of a sudden, but it's in large amount. It's not going to be possible. So you're going to have to go to targets. And targets are a whole different thing. Is that building operating somehow in a way that you can go verify and turn it on and run it? And, okay, it's meeting its target. Now I'm good. I'm done. And reward people for that. That's what we got to figure out.
One thing you said earlier, which I totally agree with, is I mean, you didn't use the word game, but M&V was a game. And in that, here are the rules, follow the rules, and that is what we will call savings. Is it really savings? No, no one ever knows what savings is, but we're going to follow the rules, and the rules say this is your savings. And I think that still exists today, that you can still make a set of rules and then you agree this is our number.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's exactly, John. The way you set that game up before was fairly straightforward and easy. I actually teach the class with a ruler and a piece of graph paper. And I say, graph out the dots you have on, how many heating degree days there were and how much energy used, and I'll put a line on it, and that's a linear assessment, and I can use that line, the slope and intercept, to do engineering things in the future and say what you would have used. But that line doesn't exist anymore. It goes all sideways and crooked. So the whole idea of using the counterfactual method, which is, again, I didn't realize when we first did this that was what we were doing. And I actually later realized, yeah, there's not any magic to it. It's everyone else in science is using it as well, to better or less, more or less, or to better or worse outcomes. One thing we got right really early on in M&V, which is there was a webinar last month from the Royal Society in England about pre-registration. Have you heard of pre-registration? Everyone should go look up pre-registration. So in science, though a lot of people use the counterfactual method, they assess a system and then they see what's influencing it. If there's variability in it, why is it varying? and they measure that in the future to compare what happens after an intervention. That's scientific. But a lot of people wait till after the intervention to start to do the science. And then they can game it, and you can make almost anything happen, and it's called p-hacking. There's a whole set of terminology for science for waiting till you have the data to then try and divine your result. So we came up with something in M&V processes is way early on called the M&V plan. And so exactly right. The whole spirit of M&V as written in the IPMVP or FEMP and CMVP, the whole spirit of M&V is everyone sits down together and agrees on the game up front. And they do an M&V plan. Here's how we're going to play it. We know we'll never know, but we're going to be adults. It's like going to Vegas. You never, you might win, but no, it's not that bad. But yeah, it's definitely a game. Savings are defined in that game. You play that game and you see what the results are. And if you don't like the game, you play it differently the next time. You do a different M&V plan. So we kind of beat science by having pre-registration baked into what M&V is. If you're doing M&V properly, you are pre-registering how you're going to do the science, how you're going to do the engineering for your M&V.
Okay, here's a question from Steve. He said, not you, a different Steve. I've just become aware of ISO 50001 and 14001. How do these protocols relate to the future of M&V? That's a great question.
So the thing about ISO, and it's funny, 2010 or 11, I'm forgetting, but getting on 13 years ago, they started that 50001 subsections, was TC 247 and 256, two different groups doing the quote unquote M&V to support 50001. So the U.S. Department of Energy had a big stake. Roland Risser was out here from PG&E. He went back to DOE, and for good reasons, they pushed this idea that energy management. Again, it's so cool because energy management to you and me might be changing a light bulb or putting in a chiller. M&V to energy management to 50001 is getting the corporate organization organized around doing it right. Do they have the policies in place? So, well, it's good because you're not going to do this stuff again until you can talk up and down the chain. So I actually went to those first meetings because I was the representative. I was a non-national representative, non-state actor, right? We had Japan and China and US and then EVO. So I got to be the non-state actor at the table going, yeah, well, we've been doing this for, at that point, 20 years or something, or 15 years. So we know a little bit, but I was completely open-eyed about maybe there's a better way scientifically to do this. I don't know. I didn't really think I didn't know. I just knew what we did. And it turned out, 50001, when they went to do their underlying M&V protocols, came up with the exact same concepts. They applied the same concepts and used a lot of the same language. But with that ISO, you have to pay for their standard, and then you get certified as a 50001. It's a whole part of a certification of your company. It sounds a lot like ESG. It's a lot like you certify a company that's doing things properly if it follows certain rules and gets certain outcomes. You're not paying exactly for the savings, so to speak, when you're doing M&V 50001, but you are getting rewarded by having a stamp on your company that you're certified.
Okay, so but I have a question, and this is, I only skimmed and I never finished because I just got bored so quick. I can't think like the 50001 people. I just can't think that way. I think a lot of engineers can't. And we have ASHRAE 14, we have IPMVP. Those are kind of, and FEMP, they're just kind of how-tos. This is how you do it. And I got the impression 50001 is, this is how you change your corporate culture and you structure things. And it's all about, you need a guy who does this, you need a person who does this and all of that. And there was no, no modeling, no do this or that. And it was, it didn't make any sense to me.
Well, it's also, so that comes, sorry, but it's funny because SEP and SEM, Strategic Energy Performance, and Superior Energy Performance and Strategic Energy Management are similar in that their aim is to influence organizations to take things seriously and come up with a champion and someone who manages the process and make them aware of the tools available. So I get to do some reviewing of these things for California utilities. I keep my toe in the water on M&V on a lot of things, and they're great in many ways in terms of aligning a behavior and awareness and making changes and incrementally moving organizations towards better performance. And then you're rewarded for it if you can meet certain criteria. And in the in the SEM world, which is big in the US, you have these two ways if you can do it. I don't know how many of you are out there doing SEM, strategic energy management, but one is you do an option C model. and it has to meet certain criteria like IPMVP criteria or ASHRAE, CVRMSE has to be below a certain amount, or R squared. You do that model, and that'll help you prove that your project's worked out, and you can thereby get incentives from the regulator. But the other one is, if you can't make the model work, what do? You use engineering calculations. So it's like, well, you either do a model or basically nothing. You just do rational engineering calculations. You just slip it through. Okay, that's the overall program is to raise awareness first. I don't diss that at all. I think it's great. There's a lot of roles, again, for all of us out there to play. That's the whole point of this talk. The role of an M&P professional, let's get back to the point here, is broadened. It's really to work within a broad community, educate the community, bring them back. Because I teach the course, I see so much like misconception and mystery around what we do. And it's really so simple. Building, either doing a performance check or building a model and updating the model. That's all we do, right? Now, the conduct of it can be infinitely complex and impossible because the model might not work, and the non-routine events are huge and they cost money, and you can't afford to do it. But the concept shouldn't be that confusing to people. There's no magic in what we do.
Okay, I have a related question, and that is in your book, in the new CMVP class from AEE, and in the test, in all three, do you go over ISO 50001 rather than just state what it is, but explain the concepts behind it?
No, I don't. In the book, I mentioned it's there. I don't think it's important, frankly, to most it's not. It wasn't important enough to get a big part of it. That might be something I overlooked, and I do different in round 2 of the book.
So then you're thinking like an engineer too. I mean, okay, got it. I mean, at least that's what I think. I think that I'm just limited in my thinking, and that I'm just an engineer, and
no. So what I put across, what I tried to emphasize in the book, and there's 4 parts to it, just so people get a sense of what I came back with. And this came out of the rethinking, re-engineering of the whole CMVP program too. Which is, the first part is conceptually, what do we got for tools? Like what can we do? We can either measure things directly, get evidence from the field. That's like the clear and first and most important. We collect evidence from the field. That's still what M&V is. Okay, we can do that in a short-term picture, put the 2 chiller in before, compare the 2, extrapolate that. That's one thing we can do, okay, short-term, or even for a week, but not continuously. If we start doing continuous measurements, we're into modeling. Okay, those are the 2 things we can do. We can take a short-term or we can do modeling. And yeah, I want everyone to be aware of that out there. That's how simple it is. And now I'm forgetting what my point was. Sorry. Oh, well, yeah. So the book. So I go and I link that to science again. I go, we didn't come up with this. Econometrics has it, science has it in different flavors. Be aware as a professional to be attuned to all the different ways people are doing the same thing with different words. That's kind of the basis of the website I have, and I'm going to be building out, called Counterfactual Designs. For each project, you design a counterfactual. That's the game you talked about earlier. You design a counterfactual. How are you going to play it for each project? I'll leave that for now. But the book has, okay, the first part is, what is the nature of our project? Second part is, what are the contexts that's played in? So 50,001 is one of those contexts, for sure. It's energy management, but because it's more of it's a management standard, not an engineering standard, I put that one down a little lower. I emphasize much more all the various contexts where they pay for the actual results. And that's primarily performance contracts and utility programs, but increasingly ESG and carbon and other things. So yeah, I focus the book on section 2 on identify your context as a professional and talk to the people there and learn their rules, because you can't really do your M&V until you've learned the specific rules. And this is true around the world. But the third section that I wrote about, here's the genesis and evolution of the protocols, why they were built and why they're different, because they had different purposes and ends in mind. ASHRAE tried to be scientific about, yes, we can measure savings. I go, yeah, well, maybe. And IPMVP was trying to be general. Here's the rules generally, you apply them where you want. And FEMP, beautiful FEMP was, here's exactly how you do it within federal procurement rules. I mean, there's no, it's great for engineers, man. They love to have, here are the rules, here's how you do it. FEMP tells you, and there's a whole history behind that. It doesn't get in the book. Someday I'll tell that. Then the fourth section of the book, though, is 27 subsections called practical considerations. All right, how are you going to apply a tariff to your savings? What kind of resolution do you need to know when these quote unquote impacts happened? How are you going to deal with uncertainty? How are you going to use uncertainty analysis to program your stuff? What is Bayesian analysis and why is that important to you potentially? There's 27 practical considerations, none of which I go into full detail, all of which can be found in other books out there that I would stack together and call, here's 27 subchapters. Each has a book in this AE library. I'd like to go into detail on each of those 27 subsections, practical considerations, on a website with more examples. That's probably one of the next projects.
Okay, here's another question. Do you think that due to renewable energy in the future, are we going to have baseline and savings more defined in money or CO2 than kilowatt hours?
Yeah, no, it's I could see the balance between all those changing quite a bit, and that's what's I think both makes this fascinating and really scary. If you're tied to the old ways, in terms of, well, we got a baseline and we used to use this much a day, and this is how much money we used, and we did this intervention, and now we're using this much. But if the billing rate gives you a negative price during the middle of the day for that quote unquote savings, if the billing rate's going to change in the future, like what it means to have a baseline and use it to deploy the counterfactual method is just changing. It's just completely changing. So I think the answer to that is you need option D software, John. I mean, and again, I have a whole part of the book where I talk about terminology. It's got strengths and weaknesses. Terminology can be a shorthand people can use to get awareness on a topic quickly if they're going in the same direction. It can be a huge impediment if people say, like, I know what option B is. I go, I don't even know what option B is. It's changed so much. Like, I don't even know. You say option B, I don't know what you're talking about. I just don't. That's just true. So yeah, terminology can be an impediment, and I don't know, like, if as things change, is carbon going to become actually really valuable because policies are going to be instituted next year that make carbon reduction, as instituted through energy management, really valuable? Well, then carbon might be the baseline, and all the rules attendant to that will be important. That's why you have to follow these upcoming summits. How are they're designing the policies of the future? What are they putting in there? Is it targets? Is it modeling? I don't know.
That's something that kind of, in a way, concerns me. So there's all these it appears, new organizations and conferences. I don't know if they're new or how new they are, but they're doing these events, and I wonder if we, meaning who's we? People who do M&V, people who have CMVPs, or people in the utility industry who've been doing M&V for a long time. I wonder if our people are attending these. I mean,
that's what the call. This is about. I'm calling you all to get out there. That's that last slide. Wake up. Go out to these meetings. Talk. You'll find they don't understand our world. We all. This 86 people. Yeah.
They might come up with stuff that just makes no sense.
They will. I guarantee they will.
So yeah, no, that's what's.
John, I find you're having this talk and opening up to people. I mean, I'd assume almost no one would show up if I said Steve Kromer's going to talk about the options, right? Like that's so 30 years ago. Like, yeah, it was a good terminology. It got us started, and you're right. I got my latest AEE certification, and I got I'm very proud certification ID #1. I got that. I spent some time on that. I was really happy with that. Thanks to AEE. They're great. The thing is, as we all need to do this. Evo, anybody out there that's with efficiency evaluation, and we all need to work together. Because the enemy isn't within our community. It's the chaos that's reigning out there, and the chaos is mostly well-intentioned. And we're all aiming for something like a habitable planet, equality, equity, all that great stuff, with different pieces of the elephant we're all touching, right? As predominantly when we do CMVP within the context of energy management, the Association of Energy Engineers. Yeah, we're actually starting from a framework of, well, it's obvious you collect evidence from the field, right? Like, no, you got to go talk to these people. They don't know what you mean. They might say engineering calculations. They don't know that you actually mean, you can take energy data from a building and analyze it? Like, you wouldn't believe what people don't know out there until you go out and talk to policymakers. So yeah, it's a consistent effort on our part as a community, as professionals, to perform our work, but also inform all the people in the policy world who are actually dictating the value of what we do. That's what's sort of scary. I mean, yeah, again, we have to be aware that there might, say renewable energy. Again, I think California yesterday, I think was 16 gigawatts solar in the middle of the day. 16. It's like a gigawatt every 6 months now it goes up. And Texas is the same thing. They're competing out there for who's going to solarize the quickest, which is great. But it also means that the whole interaction of our buildings with the grid is changing, and the value of what we do is changing, and we have to be aware of that.
Yeah, so to kind of add on to this, so some folks, a lot of California people know this, and maybe a lot of utility folks, but I'm sure a lot of folks that are listening don't. And that is, in California, all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but it's been evolving over the years. They don't want you just to save kilowatt hours. They want you to save them at a certain time.
Yep.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah. So, where do we start? Because forever in the world of energy as supplied by electricity, which is, powered and sent down wires with a potential voltage, right? When then the electrons jiggle and blah, blah, blah. Do whatever analogy you want for how the energy is delivered. And I mean, it's funny, like I was thinking this morning, making my oatmeal, like the gas coming out of that stove, I don't care about the gas at all, right? I don't care about the gas. It smells funny. What if it's not lit, it's not burning, it's useless to me, right? It's the release in that flame of heat that makes my oatmeal what I want in the morning. And it's the same thing with my coffee. I don't care about those electrons at all. I care about the fact that when they release something and it's called energy. And I just love that I'm an energy engineer because I get to play in that whole construct. And then one end of that game too is in our society, we have these people called legislatures, and then we have regulators that are out there constraining capitalism to only do certain things, and they're all in this chain, and they discovered energy 30 years ago in terms of, its impact on the environment 30, 40 years ago. So for the last 30, 40 years, our environment, we've all had jobs in participating and harnessing, transferring, and then using this energy in an optimal way, mainly for financial reasons, but increasingly over the last 20 years for these externalities like carbon and stuff. So yeah, you see, we're involved strictly in the middle of this, and we really are part of the answer. We're a huge part of the answer, but we don't get to dictate what those policies are, and which means we don't get to dictate what the value of our work is unless we get involved in it.
So what I see is like performance contractors, I consider myself one because I work with them so much. We just have these contracts that say we're going to save so many kilowatt hours, maybe so many kilowatts, and so many therms. That's about it. But in the utility sphere in California, it's like, you know what? We don't care if you save energy from, I don't know, 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. There's so much solar and so much power on the grid. That stuff's worthless. We want you to save energy at night, or not at nighttime, but maybe between, 5 to 10. That's when we want it. That's what's valuable.
Yeah, I'm sorry, John. I didn't follow through and answer your question, and you're right. You're absolutely right. So ever since they started sending electricity down wires, they did two things, though. They charged for the demand, because that was the scope of how much asset they needed to build out there at the max, right? They had to meet the peak. So whoever was building it in capitalism had to go buy enough Westinghouse generators to go meet the peak, right? And if you could reduce that, that saved everyone energy. So when the regulators started regulating, Commonwealth Edison in Chicago, they said, we'll give you the landscape, we'll give you the whole region, but we're going to ask you to reduce prices and do it efficiently, and we're going to regulate you to do that. So you get the whole, we're going to give you a single, monopoly on the business of supplying electrons to Illinois, but we're going to regulate you and how you do that. And one way is we're going to try and keep your asset base low, and then keep the load management steady. They had load management in Chicago, streetcars, refrigerators, all that stuff back in 1900. They were saying, well, if we build more streetcars, that'll use load in the evening, and we can level it all out and optimize our assets, right? This has been going on forever. In different parts of the country, they'll charge you for demand different from kilowatt hours. Same project in Ohio and Florida for NASA, completely different demand charge, completely different kWh charge. The project would either fly or not. It was a lighting retrofit with NASA things. This is way back when. So the rates always dictated what energy management you got to do. They were always important. But now, yeah, you're right. With solar, it's not just the flat rate, it's the time of use rates, and it's the fact that we're so successful in getting renewables on, and now they're trying to incent battery storage, right? So now you're going to pay an extra asset in your house to have a battery that's storing energy and moving it around. It's not what many of us my age were taught about energy management, like go out and just use less. Absolutely not. and getting the grid to react and when the carbon's being generated on the grid and all those factors. And no one has a full handle on it that I know. Like someone out there, if you have a full handle, let me know. But
isn't that what Recurve does?
well, Recurve takes the information that's available from the assets that it would point in terms of smart meters and puts them together and analyzes them in a way to let decision makers think about it. So absolutely, they're part of the ecosystem of solutions, but they don't have an answer to who's going to set the policy about what the carbon reduction was worth or who's going to get on the grid. I mean, DOE's got a bunch of stuff going on in terms of grid analysis. It's all great piecework. So I'll try and stay, I'd like to stay a little, Picasso-esque is what they called me yesterday. This M&V stuff is like Picasso-esque. It's a strange accumulation. So I like to listen to this guy, Sapolsky, Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, and he's talking about systems that are, stable, but when they're forced hard enough, they break down, they get chaotic, and you get all kinds of chaotic behavior. And that's kind of where we are in the energy systems now. There's no single point of reference that can allow you to do the analysis across the board. There's too many interlinking factors, so no one's really got control of the whole picture. But you still have to operate as if systems were, engineerable, right? Even though they're getting chaotic, piecewise, we have to attribute, try and keep our minds focused on what we can actually accomplish in front of us, like put that better chiller in, and then, again, work with all our decision makers to see how to value our assets properly or our work properly.
Okay, yeah, I guess a way to look at where M&V is now and certainly is going in the future is we're kind of like a big anthill. It's just chaos kind of, and then there are certain trails of ants that are certain, let's say, highways where a lot of ants go, but there's also ants doing this and ants doing this and ants doing this. And they don't always talk to each other and are just doing everything just to make the hive survive. And that's kind of
so John, that analogy is the analogy Sapolsky used this morning in the second lecture. It's lecture 22 from 2013 at Stanford. It is, you put a single ant out there, you watch them, it's chaos. You put 2 or 3 of them, but what ants are doing is they're operating by several simple rules. And if you put enough of them in a room, those rules will end up in playing out and give you structure. And that's how this ant behavior form. E.O. Wilson figured this out. This is exactly where we are. Like, this is why the whole point of this thing is engineers, M&V people unite and get together in large enough numbers, systems can evolve. Individually, you won't have an impact, but in large enough numbers, there's something that happens if they're communicating that better systems can evolve. And I think we're there. And again, I'm trying to invite all of you to come into the industry more and talk to more decision makers and be prominent out there. Be active.
That's the thing. There's a lot of us that do M&V, but we just do our jobs, most of us.
Exactly, technicians.
That's right.
The technicians are great. I love technicians, man. Technicians are necessary to fix my stove, to fix my water heater, to fix things. But we need judgment people. We need people that can speak, soft skills, understand what tools are available, and inform the whole world out there and work back and forth. That's kind of the modern role of a professional in M&V. There's an infinite job for technicians in M&V. There'll be infinite work doing regression analysis, infinite work running option C, going to the field, putting meters on, all that's done.
I think Steve is saying that he wants the 79 of you that are here still.
That survived.
Many of you to be like Steve and go to these conferences and speak up. Here's a comment, and that is future M&V will be based on social cost of carbon. M&V, from my perspective, has become ubiquitous out of a growing demand for accountability and validation of an agreed upon end result, very similar to carbon. M&V is, very similar to how commissioning has grown in new construction. You need me to put that again? Okay, you got it. Good.
So I think the parallel is really good, and commissioning if I can define terminology, as a function of assessing an operating system against its design. So you go to the field and you collect evidence on how something's actually performing. Again, these 2 words, performance and operation, are funny. They're interestingly interchangeable. So if I go to the system, I see how it was designed, and I see if when I go to the field, I've collected evidence it's working the way it was supposed to. It's performing properly or operating properly. And if it's not, I fix it. And that entails understanding what the design was, right? You can't commission something until you know what the purpose of it was and what it means to be operating properly. And after you've done that, it's an important, incredibly important connection back to M&V, is that in many cases, it now will be consuming more energy because it was not operating properly. That outdoor air damper was shut and indoor air quality wasn't where it was supposed to be. So when it's all commissioned properly, so there's not a one-to-one relationship between reduction absolute and energy consumption and decommissioning, but there is an absolute comparison in terms of the methodology supports, an infrastructure of energy management, which gets us where we want to be, properly operating facilities. M&V is also just out there to quantify, again, either instantaneous impacts or the amassing of impacts, integration over time. But sometimes it's negative in the case of commissioning, where you're actually going to use more energy. But what you can say is with M&V, if you would have been using more, if you, well, you can't even say that. I'll leave that one alone.
Okay. I took the CMVP test maybe 20 years ago, and it was all based on the IPMVP. I mean, that's all it was. I didn't attend the class. I think I was the last guy who did that. I didn't attend the class. I just took the test.
Oh yeah.
And okay. And so then they stopped that, and you had to take the class to take the test. But it was just based on the CMVP, not on what they were teaching, really. And they were teaching all the stuff about metering and how to calibrate meters, and that stuff wasn't even on the test. My question now is two things: has the test changed, or is it totally based on the IPMVP? And then second, you said you changed the class to incorporate a bunch of new concepts. Has the test changed to mirror the change in the class?
Yeah, easy. Those are easy, and I could be unequivocal. I mean, yes, the test has changed. And what happened, the story there is 2.5 years ago, organizations, people, stuff, right? Shorthand for EVO, which for 20 years, Efficiency Evaluation Organization, EVO, had been the steward of the content. So EVO was the organization that actually 2004 had been IPMVP Inc. And in 2001, on September 15th, I think, an important day to remember because it was right in that era, we formed a nonprofit. So Department of Energy, having nursed IPMVP and FEMP along, said, you're on your own, go become a nonprofit and see if you can survive. That was 2001. In 2002, as IPMVP Inc., we said, hey, Al Tuman at AEE, would you like to do a certification? And in 2004, on the basis of starting that out and getting some footing, we changed the name of our organization. That's where this Berlin talk came from, which is the source of this whole presentation here, which was I was going around the world talking about IPMVP as the modern version of an open source sort of M&V capability. So that was 2004. It's 2024, 2 years ago. EVO and the CMVP program wasn't meeting EVO's needs or something, and so they split off and they have their own PMVA. God bless you all. I hope you all get PMVAs as well. I think that's, since I was the training chair or co-chair for a long time, it's still all focused on IPMVP and what you'll learn there, which is fine. Most of that's really good technical stuff. When we had a chance to re-engineer the CMVP, what we said is, how is M&V really being applied in ways we see and have learned over 20 years? And what we saw primarily was, like you said, it wasn't just performance contracting, it was now utility programs. And what we wanted to do is break it down and show the constituent parts of M&V and teach people how, from the basis from when it starts and how it can be applied across a lot of different contexts. So now we have concepts and contexts. And the contexts are an important part of learning, like how you apply it, because option C is different in a contract than a utility program, just is. So, okay, that's what we teach differently. Quick story, the AEE organization does certifications for a living, and there's a process to do a certification if you redo one, and we followed that process, and we got experts in for the body of knowledge. The body of knowledge of what M&V is defined on the website, and in the class, we go over what the body of knowledge is. And we stay pretty low on Bloom's taxonomy. We make awareness and understanding, not that you're going to be able to be doing all these things, like doing regression analysis successfully after you take our course, but you'll understand where it is and put a team together. So the course is based on team building and understanding. And yeah, we had to redo the entire exam to match the body of knowledge. It's a tenuous process. I mean, coming up with a body of knowledge and then having questions and actually test it properly, there's always some gray area. And we're constantly revising the test to make sure it stays fair. And there's statistical ways to do that, called the point by serial. So I'm the chair of the CMVP program at AEE, and they take that seriously, quality. And yeah, but it's a whole new program based on, again, everything we're learning right here about talking about here about the role of a professional now versus being like a technical, agent.
Okay. Now, you're not doing an audio book. I know you're not doing that, right?
I don't think so. Unless it's AI. We haven't talked about AI. And it's funny because I put it on one of my notes here. But I think AI could record my voice and then generate.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
And I think AI is such an important part of what's coming that we just have no idea. It's such an emergent technology, such an emergent thing. And we could do a whole separate podcast on this, but I use it daily in terms of I go to chat to get code to put in R. I wasn't a very good R coder. I don't have to be anymore. I can just go to chat, get the code, put it in R. I can do resampling of all my data. I've got a big project I'm working on. And I have so much fun to use chat and these different AI tools to help me with my code, and I'm much more efficient, and it works in Excel, it works in R. So there's so many ways as a technician, again, as a practitioner, that I just love where we're at. That's why it stays fun. And I worry about these policy people and have to speak in a language they understand. That's the thing. And we can all get tied up and so interested in our technical details, but we also have to be able to speak to the broader world, or else our work's not going to be valued. The work of the energy managers isn't going to be valued.
Absolutely right. That's good. Well, I think we ran out of questions and time. Is there any last things you want to talk about before we move on to our last slides?
No, I just, again, I really appreciate the opportunity, John. I hope the audience, what's left of 60, we've dropped a few off, is enthusiastic. They see a bright future. They see whether it's the technical skills you can get using AI and other things, but whether, helping the world figure out how to implement energy management in a world of changing carbon credits and ESG and all that. You're in it for a wild ride. We're all in for a wild ride. And I'm hoping, to be a part of that for everyone, some way, form, or fashion for quite a while still. So, because I at least want to be aware enough to know what's going on and follow it. But we're going to need help. So I hope everyone contributes.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Thanks for coming. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.